All right. All right, Chuck, I think we're live. Welcome
All
to
right.
Urban Files. Uh, I'm your co-host, Max, and my co-host, I don't know what I'm
How you
talking
doing?
about. I
Yeah.
told you I'm always thrown off when I start the live stream because I'm trying to manage the stream while also watching what's going on. So, yeah, I still haven't.
Absolutely. Well, welcome in
How to
everyone.
do
It's no worries at all. We are here with another episode of Urbanist content, and we're really here with another ranking, which I think is one of the things that Max and I enjoy kind of discussing and analyzing most as it comes to cities, from publications like Monocle to Loughborough University to The Economist to numerous publications that create lists like these. So today we're talking about the US News and World Report city rankings, which I'm not familiar with exactly when they were. I don't remember what year it was again.
2016, they
2016. Okay,
launched.
so they started that more recently than they started their college rankings, which I believe are probably one of the more cited or referenced studied ones of those. And also their hospital rankings are very well known and kind of cited. Like a lot of hospitals will, if they get a gold medal, they'll cite it from US News and World Report. So it's a point of credit. And I think the first thing that is really standing out to me, and this before we really get into looking and discussing the rankings, is it's discussing a city, at least in terms of the aspect of quality of life or where to live, is much more of a subjective question than where is the most elite university or where is the best hospital for certain practices. I mean, I think we know the big four hospitals, or at least from what I understand, would be at Cleveland Clinic, Mass Gen, Johns Hopkins, and Mayo Clinic. And you'd have like the Ivy League of that for universities. And clearly, we enjoy bigger cities, but for living, there's not one gold standard per se. And you see that in the diversity of this list and the leaderboard.
Yeah, definitely. So, uh, as I was trying to find when they actually began this list of rankings, I did notice just how much the rankings have changed over these last 6 years. So that's something else that's kind of interesting to me, how volatile it is from year to year.
Yeah. And I think to the point on that, like I don't mind, like, obviously some modest changes to that. But I think sometimes, and I think even Dave Amos from City Beautiful mentioned this in a video that he actually made on best places lists, is when you're seeing a different city on top every year, especially when you're seeing one that's maybe in the top 5 or 10 consistently for a while, and then it drops out of the top 100 entirely the next year. That type of inconsistency can kind of make you wonder if there are some ulterior motives in a list like this, or if is some level of, at least as a conspiracy level, it makes you wonder. But what I have to say I respect about it is, as you said, they really do have a pretty good number of variables that they used and kind of amalgamated together to come up with their rankings. So, Max, I know you looked at that more than me. What were some of those that they were really focusing on that you maybe liked or didn't like as much?
Yeah, they're pretty transparent with their methodology. And to US News's credit, they not only share kind of their factors and formula, but they also are pretty transparent with where they're getting their data from. So, when you talk about crime, how are they measuring crime? Not only like how important is it, but how are they getting those numbers? And same with you know uh, what you were mentioning, hospitals, medical, things like that. They try to explain where they were pulling their data from, in addition to how they incorporated it into the methodology. So I think from a transparency standpoint, there's probably no funny games being played here. It's just that as they tweak their formula, as they include more metros as well from year to year, And as that data changes, because our country is shifting a lot, especially with COVID, the results are going to be different. So I think for us, those of us who like to talk about lists and create our own lists, we're always kind of coming from the end result side, kind of how we imagine things to be. Whereas this is really just purely setting up a formula, crunching the numbers, and then seeing where the die ends up being cast. So
plugging it in. I mean, and from a just having been done with academic research standpoint, I can kind of respect that a little bit. I mean, just letting the results be what they may, and you don't have an H0 and an H1 in academic terms where it's like H0 is what I believe and H1, you're not rejecting the null. You're just putting this all out there in I'd like to think at least you're putting this all into like a big calculation and kind of averaging it out based on the way that it's and just taking it as it goes. And I think to your point, that really creates some of this interesting mix of cities. I mean, we have big cities on the list. I think San Francisco is up there. I believe Raleigh-Durham was in the top 10. But we also have smaller cities. I mean, right here in Florida, Sarasota is at number 9. I believe Melbourne made the top 25 on the East Coast. So really a broad selection of places. What are some places that stood out to you?
So yeah, I mean, I'm going to touch on that since you mentioned it. They measured here in 2022 now, their ranking incorporated the top 150 metro areas by population, which is up from the top 100 when they first launched. So they're looking at a broader spectrum of cities now, smaller cities when you get down to 150. And since all of those are in the mix, I think it really lends itself to being critiqued by observers who are kind of inputting their own biases. You have a city like San Francisco and a city and sort of a polar opposite city, perhaps like maybe a Huntsville, in terms of physical layout at least. And they're both ranked extremely high. And so some people are going to favor one and really dislike the other. And this type of a ranking just invites that kind of criticism.
Yeah.
So I'll throw it back to you.
It sounds like you have some people in the background that really dislike San Francisco and like Huntsville. That's what I'm hearing right now. So, that's got to be what it is. So, as far as when I think about this, right, I think it's fun in a way because it does give that kind of like stir the pot nature of having such vastly different places next to one another and up there. I do think though it probably would be better if they took somewhat as a level of weight class, like if you had like a top 50, then maybe a next 50 or next 100, just because having like the context of a place like the type of person that likes living in San Francisco probably really would not be huge on living in Huntsville, as you said, and vice versa. I think Huntsville might be kind of, with no offense to it, I don't think it would be an ideal place for someone that likes living in San Francisco. But I guess the only other thing I saw that, like, just in taking a cursory glance of the kind of what they chose, is like they tended to, I think, favor the Sun Belt indirectly, at least, by kind of like penalizing markets that didn't have a growing population. I think, in contrast to that's, I guess you could say people sorts of factors that influence whether people are moving to a place or not. And the reality is people oftentimes are moving for work or any myriad of other reasons. And I guess going beyond that, like when you look at Europe and Japan, which have a declining birth rate, declining population, they generally make up the leaderboard of global livability. So that was probably the biggest thing I saw from the methodology that I probably as a biased Midwesterner, took issue with. But overall, it was interesting, and I'd like to lean more into the data.
Yeah. So yeah, one thing to note, now that we've mentioned how metros, both large and small, are included, are mixed in together. Uh, I would take issue perhaps with how strongly they weighted desirability, and not just that. So they gave it a 17.5% weighting out of 100.
Yeah.
So it's really almost like 1/5 of the overall rankings. And to find this desirability index, they surveyed people across the country, but their survey was less than 4,000 people. So it's not really a very comprehensive snapshot, I would say, of all the residents in the country. And the idea of desirability is to see where do people feel like they want to live. So it's more of a psychological thing than an actual experience. And so I wonder whether that really affected the rankings, being that it was
and if they were going to do that, I feel like you almost have to lend equal weight to like the happiness index, which I think they often talk about how Utah is the happiest state, or I think Vermont is generally up there and those sorts of things too, and that obviously has its demographic and other cultural biases to it as well. But something like something being desirable, like, I mean, I get it, but like, unless you've actually lived that experience, it's really hard to say or attribute that much weight to it.
Right. It's the only thing that was a larger factor was their value index, which I don't have an issue with. But then it's also important to note that as well, that they're really looking at this through the lens of value and affordability when they're talking about best cities, which makes sense. But it just needs to be noted that was the biggest factor in their
which makes it all the more impressive. I mean, when you think about it, San Francisco still managed to find its way up there. It must have been acing the entire rest of his study then, if that was, well, I'm sure it dropped some based on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you really need to get into the nuts and bolts here, and value, as they defined it, was utilizing sort of median household income with respect to housing costs. And so, yes, San Francisco is extremely expensive, but there are enough high-paid workers, employees there, that the median at least can hold up to that. If you're unfortunately not making those kinds of dollars, you are not going to feel the same about San Francisco, about living in San Francisco, as somebody who is making enough money to fall into that median household income and be able to kind of tread water with the high housing costs there.
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So
well, it's an interesting list, and I think it makes me want to really read more into this, because I don't think there's any perfect list out there, but it kind of almost makes me want to figure out what a list would look like for me if I was deciding or trying to make it something applicable. What would that look like? So that's it's cool, and it's really interesting food for thought. So I'm appreciative that they put it out there ultimately, because it gives us something to talk about.
Yeah, and of course, our favorite website, City Data, the forums on there, people were jumping on this on these rankings, and somebody had broken out sort of the rankings by tier, by sort of population tier, which I think goes more towards how we think of things normally.
Right.
If we were to divide, separate out the small cities, medium cities, and large cities, and kind of look at how they stack up against each other. Yeah.
Well, credit to whoever posted that. That also check that out too.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. We'll be back with some more content very soon.
All right.